And I actually had a question to put to Alvin here, if he knows, or can say. I understood from previous reports that the report by the AU Commission on Illicit Financial Flows was to be presented at the summit in Equatorial Guinea. And when you look on the site for that high-level panel and click on reports, you find a blank page.
Yeah.
The question is it being held up by somebody, or is it just inefficiency in reporting?
No, that was a deliberate move by Becky himself, that he felt that Equatorial Guinea would be not the best place to launch the report, so it was postponed until until September.
Okay, thank you for that. I actually just wanted to take a second to share a personal story. I recently had the opportunity to live in Ghana, in Accra, a few years ago, actually just about 2.5 years ago. And at the time, the Ghana cedi was about 1.5 Ghana cedi to $1. And we were so excited for Ghana. I think there was a lot of talk in terms of the transition from the old Ghana cedi to the new Ghana cedi. But it is one of the world's fastest growing economies, as Alvin and I think Bill have also talked about, and the second largest economy in Africa. But this morning, I think it was published in Bloomberg that President Mahama now has to go to the IMF and see what they can do and possibly start from ground zero. And this is due to the rapid depreciation of the Ghana cedi. And I know that at the time I was living there, you couldn't get an apartment for less than $3,000 US a month and a year up front. So, and this is in an area where people don't have running water. So when we talk about, what does it mean in terms of fast economic growth and income inequality, they also found oil in Ghana, and that has an impact to the local people as well. So, sadly, the Occupy Ghana folks were out last week, the Ghana diaspora here in Washington, and really asking their president to stand up and respond to some of these questions.
So, I think taking a step back, when you look at the question of income inequality, it's not an issue that is, just affecting folks here in the States, right? But it's affecting folks across the world, and specifically on the continent. Because she's in the room, I'm going to have to give her credit. I normally take credit for this quote, but everyone from the president to the Pope is talking about income inequality, right? Why is that happening? In the States, you look at a company like Walmart, a company that is the largest private employer in the country with 1.4 million workers, a company that earns $16 billion in profits, and a company that's majority owned by the Walton heirs, 6 individuals, worth collectively $149 billion. Last year, Walmart and the Walton heirs received about $7.8 billion in tax credits, funds, etc., taxpayer assistance. So what did that assistance look like? It looked like food stamps, Medicaid, Medicare. It also looked like some of the tax rates and havens that the panelists have talked about. But again, it's not limited to just here in the States. When you look at income inequality across the continent, right, nearly 50% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa lives on less than $1 a day. And what you're seeing is that people are standing up, rising up, because this level of income inequality is unsustainable. And it's grown exponentially over the last 20, 30 years. So I think the question that we must ask is, in terms of not only looking at the interests of people here in the States and in Africa, but how do we come together collectively to address this issue? This is not just a South Africa problem. This is not just a problem in Nigeria or a problem here in the States, because what we're seeing is that with greater globalization of corporations, the borders that, at one point in time were extremely defined are now essentially becoming irrelevant, right? And again, as I think as the panel has discussed, there are a number of issues and a number of ways in which, one, we can not only address this, but also talk about it, right? How were we able to relate to people who have, in many respects, I think, don't have an understanding of the level of income inequality, right? When you think about the fact that 42% of Americans' combined wealth is equivalent to 6 Americans, that's a problem, right? And I definitely don't want to occupy as much time. Everyone's talking about occupy. But I think as we continue the discussion, I think those are some things that we should really think about. And I love to hear from the panel and from the audience, I think, in terms of, the issue of this rising inequality that we're seeing here in the States and across the country.
Thank you, Derek. Actually, my first question goes to you, Derek. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about Walmart. I think folks are curious to know what are some of the advocacy, actions that are happening and some of the work that you're doing with them.
So, I think a couple of things. One, when you look at labor's engagement and involvement in the private sector and even in the public sector over the course of the last 80 years or so, it has definitely, at one point in time, I think it was extremely strong, and then over the last 20 years or so, we've seen a decrease. I think at its height, it was about 42% of American workers were involved with unions in some way, shape, or form. And now I think we're closer to 10%, maybe 12%, if that high. So the philosophy in terms of this campaign, Making Change at Walmart, I just talked about Walmart's outsized role in the U.S. economy. And the truth is that it's one of the largest companies in the world, right, in terms of profit, in terms of employees, et cetera. And what we recognize is that Walmart's role impacts us whether or not you shop there, right, you work there, because as Walmart goes, so does the U.S. economy. As the U.S. economy goes, so does the world economy, right? Last quarter, Walmart, actually for the last few quarters, Walmart has seen a decrease in terms of its sales, right? And on one hand, they equate it to bad weather. At the same time, they equate it to the fact that people aren't receiving enough food stamps in order to buy their products. And at the same time, they pay their employees poverty wages, right? Like the average Walmart salary is probably, for a full-time worker, probably around $17,000, $18,000. The majority of Walmart workers definitely earn less than $25,000. Again, we have to make sure that this is relative, right? In the U.S., $25,000 is not a lot of money. Of course, you go somewhere else that, is a substantially high wage. So again, I think we have to look at it. But what's happening is that because people are living on $12,000 a year, $15,000 a year, they're having to rely more and more on the public sector taxpayer dollars in order to survive. But then you also have, and Bill, kind of mentioned this a little bit in terms of the political aspect, you have a U.S. government that in many ways is very complacent in terms of dealing with these issues, and at best is stagnant because of divided government. And again, I would like to say that this is just a U.S. problem, but we all know that it's not. And so the work that we're doing is we're not only trying to bring awareness of these issues to the masses, but we're also trying to empower workers in a way that in many respects they haven't been empowered at the company before. Officially, we're not trying to unionize at Walmart. Ironically, some of the stronger unions that we are seeing are coming out of the continent, and I think I'm very interested in knowing for myself in terms of how that is impacting, whether positively or negatively, the issue of income inequality. Because what we know here in the States is that one of the greatest, I think, things that have prevented a higher level of income inequality has been unions. But now that they are steadily on the decline. We're seeing income inequality increase. And I think we cannot take it for granted that there is no correlation.
I'm so glad, Alvin, you want to chime in, because I have a question to add to whatever you're about to say. Bringing it back to the Africa context, you talked a lot about these companies, these strange companies. And so I just want to once again quote this article during this EU-Africa summit that said there are loopholes in the current system that have fostered a strange breed of companies. They do not do any real work, don't have any employees, and are more often than not don't even disclose who owns them. These anonymous companies are one of the primary vehicles used to funnel illicit money from Africa into places like the European Union. And so coming out of this summit, the European Parliament has actually voted to require EU-based companies and trusts to list their beneficial owners in a central registrars, and that would be publicly accessible, which would allow authorities, civil society, journalists, citizens from around the world to verify who owns these companies. And so my question is this enough? Isn't it in some way already being done?
Yeah, before I respond to that, I think that Derek's presentation for me links very well with the kind of work that we have been trying to do.
Can't hear.
Sorry, I was saying that Derek's presentation, I think, links very well to the kind of work that we are trying to do in Africa with trade unions. I think that the disputation of trade unions has significantly contributed to the kind of all power that companies have. Actually, much of one of the World Bank's, the World Bank produces every year sort of a cost of doing business and rate of doing business in many African countries. And one factor that they factor into that is how easy is it for companies to get away with regulations that disallow unionization. So particularly, for example, I was giving flower sector as an example. Companies have a right to disallow unionization. So what is happening is we are working very closely with the ITUC Africa, which is the International Trade Union Confederation for Africa. And one example is, for example, in Tanzania, where their branch, they have found out that if you look at the extractive sector, the perception that governments have, or the belief that governments have, is that they have to sit down with the companies to negotiate the taxes. What kind of taxes do they pay? When should those taxes fall? How much leeway do they need to recoup their capital investment? Do they need 5 years? Do they need 10 years? But in reality, you find that it is actually the workers that are paying the taxes and not the companies, because companies are not, they are reporting losses because of the kind of practices, as I was saying earlier. So they were looking at particularly at one particular company, one mining company in Tanzania, and found out that out of the total taxes that company paid, I think 72, the exact figure, 72% of it was out of workers' taxes. And the company presents us as taxes that we are paying. So they would say, they are collecting the taxes on behalf of governments, but they say the taxes they are paying. Actually, in Kenya, there is and that's not only in Kenya, a new kind of style of trying to award the best taxpayer. So you find that it's breweries, the beer making companies, telecommunication companies, all receives award, which fits very well to their corporate responsibility banner, that they are the best taxpayers. But when you look at actually how much taxes they are paying on the profits, it's minimal, but the bigger part of the profits coming from the employee, they pay as you want. Now on the question of the beneficial ownership, I think there are three things there to look at. Number one, of course, if you look at the structures, I said earlier that how much trade is happening between related companies. It makes it very imperative to know that these companies are related in the first place. Right now, companies don't have obligations globally, at least according to the International Financial Reporting Standards. You are not obliged to really report depending on the